It was days after the battle with the Green Man, the park still a mess, when the lady came to us in a state that my grandmother would have called a tizzy. She was holding a scroll, Tobias clapping at her heels, and she looked at us as if she were holding a viper instead of a parchment. "Brandylow, listen," she said, clapping her hands as she put the scroll under her arm. "We need to get this place in order." She looked around at the carnage that still needed to be set to right, and looked distinctly worried. "Randolph, come with me and bring your deputy. I quite like his counsel." Randy stood, looking at me for nearly a minute before I realized I was who she was talking about. "Me?" I said, almost amused. "Guess you got a promotion," he said, indicating I should follow her. She was waiting for us by the lily pond, pacing nervously. "Randolph, I need the garden in perfect order before the new moon." "I done told you my name's not Randolph, it's Randy. What's this all about anyway? It's a lot of work in less than a week." The lady looked like she might yell at Randy, but Tobias put a hand on her shoulder and said something quietly to her. The lady nodded, moving over to the pool to talk to some of her helpers. They were working on something of their own, and it seemed that we were forgotten for the moment. "Forgive her, she's under a lot of stress." "It's understandable. We're all under a lot of pressure. What's all this about?" Randy asked. "Do you recall when we spoke about the Fey Courts?" Tobias asked, looking back at her as she moved about fitfully. "Yeah, you said they was dangerous." "They are, but one of them is coming here. Titania heard about our recent skirmish and wants to meet with the lady." Randy tried to keep his cool, but it was hard to miss the gulp. "Why would she do that? And why didn't she come to help us if she was so damn concerned?" Tobias rolled his eyes. "I've already told you, Titania wouldn't risk so much against Winter, not at the height of their power. Anyway, Titania is coming to see the park, and the lady, and she'll be expecting a feast. Sack of cheeseburgers from the McDonald's ought to be enough, after all their help in the battle." Tobias breathed in deeply, clearly trying to keep his tongue in check. "Listen very carefully, Randy. It doesn't matter how much or how little anyone helped in the Winter War. We will not spurn Titania. To do so would be very dangerous. Titania could sweep us off the board with a thought, and the lady is beholden to her. We will cook her a feast. We will serve her, and you will not say anything that might in any way anger her. And if I do," Randy said curtly, "then you will be destroyed, and there will be nothing that the lady can do about it." Randy thought about that for a minute, before nodding and asking what he could do to help. "We will assemble a banquet area near the lily pond. You will go and gather the Brandylow and put them into groups. One to set up, one to cook the meal, and one to finish cleaning the park. You got 3 days. Do your best." Randy sighed and shook his head. "Always so much nonsense. Sometimes I miss just working a normal 9 to 5. That was a lie. None of us missed the grind, but as we both turned to go, Tobias called my name. "The lady has decided that you will be given the title of deputy to Randy here. This is your mark of office. Don't lose it." He handed me a polished wooden stick with a metal head on it, just like the one Randy had received. "Cool. Looks like you got a promotion, kid." I wasn't sure what the difference was, but Randy put me to work straight away. There were essentials to buy, menus to assemble, and all manner of other things to do. The next 3 days went by in a blur, and I found myself moving like a whirlwind. Randy told me to take over the cooking crew, and I was suddenly going into town to get things that we couldn't grow in the park. Titania's court would expect a feast fit for a queen, and I brought more meat than I'd ever seen in my whole life. I was a little worried at first, not wanting to put people off with my appearance, but Tobias waved it off when I asked him about it. He had just handed me a list of items they would need from the butcher, a list as long as my arm, and I had never even heard of some of the things there. "Won't I startle people when they see, well, all this?" I said, holding up a hoof. Tobias waved a hand. "They won't see it." "How? I'm hairy as a Sasquatch." Yes, but normal people can't see that. I must have looked dumbfounded because he laughed at me. I swear, haven't you wondered why none of the guests have commented on your appearance? Normal people just see us as regular folk. Oh, sure, we look a little prettier, a little more handsome, but they don't see us as anything strange unless we spend a lot of time in their company. A brandylow possesses a certain amount of glamour, and it's how we move about without being noticed. I took the list and went to get started, contemplating what he had told me. I guess there was more to being a brandylow than I had thought, and it was like learning something new every day. The butcher raised an eyebrow at me when I brought him the list, and who could blame him? The list contained amounts of meat that would have seemed odd outside of a king's pantry. They wanted hams, 3 turkeys, a brace of quail, whatever that was, and an assortment of gourmet meats for other things. There were equally long lists for the grocer as well, and the old lady at Ingalls laughed at me when I handed it to her. I ended up going to Walmart for the stuff they didn't have, and it was a good thing I'd driven the big truck because the cab was packed with vegetables and meats and other assorted delicacies. The other brandylow handled the prep work, the older ones instructing the younger ones on how to prepare for a royal visit. Some of them, the ones that had been around before the lady was turned to stone, recalled other times when Queen Titania and her court had come to call, and Missy, the oldest of the brandylow in the park, told us about the gala of 1890 that she had attended as the lady's handmaiden. It was the most magical thing I'd ever seen. Her court is like nothing you've ever imagined. I was raised in the final years of Rome. I know what grand parties look like, but this was beyond anything I had ever seen. The lights are clouds of fairies. The food is like nothing that you've seen before. The wine flows like water. The members of the court are dressed in fabrics so light they might be clouds, materials that turn them into trees or rivers or mythical beasts. They held their revels for days, days where the sun neither rose or fell, and they were merry times indeed. I found myself sitting more than anything, watching the cooks work and directing their efforts. They all seemed to see the stick and know instinctively that I had the backing of the lady. I wondered if it were enchanted somehow. Even the grumpiest of brandylow, the ones who had treated me like a kid before, were now unquestioning of my orders. I was a little amazed at first, but over time I got used to it. I still had to answer to Randy, not that I minded, and as the cooking finished, I found it was evening of the 3rd day. Time really did fly when you had something to do, it seemed. We brought the food out to the banquet area, and I was amazed at what the lady had accomplished with the help of her attendants, and Tobias, of course. A new growth of trees held up a series of chandeliers, each of them accompanied by clusters of fairy lights. Ornate silver tables were set up everywhere, the food going onto a huge bronze construction that looked like a giant picnic table. There were fountains that appeared to be gushing wine or champagne perhaps, and the grass was thick underfoot, save for a stone dance floor near the bandstand. Some of the brandylow had gathered there with instruments, and had to stop myself from snickering at their little tuxes. The hair poked out of their finery in odd places, and they looked quite a sight. "There you are," Randy said, and I had to cover my mouth with a hand as I caught sight of him. Randy was draped out in a toga. The red worked through the piping, probably signifying something, and his head was adorned with a wreath of golden leaves. He sniffed. "Laugh it up, kid. There's one for you, too." He handed me a garment bag, and I saw there was a crisp white toga inside that one as well. The piping was red on mine as well, and when Tobias approached, I saw he was dressed similarly, though his piping was blue on white. I figured the colors had to mean something, but I didn't want to look foolish for asking. Red was probably for security, I supposed, and Tobias's blue might mean something more scholarly. "Get in your toga," Tobias hissed, pushing me towards the bandstand. "They'll be here any minute." "Why have I got to get all dressed up?" I asked, trying to figure out how to get the thing on without looking silly. I'm a nobody. Tobias watched me struggle for a few minutes before throwing up his hands and stepping in to help. You aren't a nobody, and you shouldn't say such things regardless. You're a deputy to the head of security. In my day, it would have been like being the second to the head of the Queen's Guard. You hold power. Don't doubt it, and certainly don't abuse it. The lady likes you quite a lot. She trusts you, as she does Randy, and she's spoken quite highly of your acumen and your bravery. I don't have to tell you not to make a scene, as I did Randy, and you have a level head that would be useful during times of unrest and times of growth. Carry yourself well tonight, and don't doubt that you deserve to be here. The sound of trumpets made him stiffen, and when he turned back to the banquet area, I saw a group of armored men and women approaching. They're early. Come on, we need to get in position. The Brandylow had stopped where they were, watching as the armored group walked in tight formation. They bore standards of blooming trees, a proud sun, and a field in summer, and amidst there were other banners that were too numerous to make out. Their armor was the color of the growing season, burnished greens and golds, yellow like a summer sun, brown as deep as the earth, and all of it tromping through our garden as seamlessly as any organized display. There were about 30 of the armored knights, and behind them, riding on snow-white horses, came the court. Missy hadn't done them justice. They were dressed in fabrics I had no words to describe, in colors that I had no name for, and it appeared that some of them had simply taken pieces of the sky. They looked like birds, like animals, like plants, like nothing at all. I'm doing a bad job of this, but it's hard to explain creatures from outside your own reality. There were ladies with 2 big eyes riding side saddle, men with pointed ears and high cheekbones, and several on foot that were likely pages or squires. They were so alien, so lovely, and I felt moved to supplication in a way that I had never experienced. Tobias put a hand on my shoulder, grounding me a little, and that was when I saw her. Amidst the court, riding something akin to one of those Anheuser-Busch horses that pull the cart in the commercials, came the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, though I would never have said as much within the lady's hearing. She rode side saddle, her gown trailing behind her like a field in midsummer. Her hair was long and sleek, simultaneously blonde and brown somehow, and her inquisitive green eyes seemed to look everywhere at once. She wore no armor, no weapons, and seemed to need them less than a daisy needs a lance. She could only be Titania, and it seemed that Shakespeare hadn't done her justice. There was a bearded warrior riding beside her. Oberon, perhaps. And when the procession stopped, a handsome youth came forward and unfurled a scroll. Queen Titania, matriarch of spring and summer, ruler of the bounty, bringer of the warmth, dispeller of the cold, mother of ease, bids you welcome her and her folk to your humble court. I wasn't sure what to say. Randy seemed equally as speechless, but we were saved the trouble by the emergence of our mistress. The pale lady, mistress of strange, champion of summer, bringer of the warm, dispeller of the cold, an enemy of the winter lord, entreats her lady to be at ease and enjoy the bounty set for her by this, her humble servant. Titania's lips stretched into a full and sumptuous smile as she slid from her horse and glided towards the lady. The two embraced, kissing each other on the cheek before she called for her company to be at ease. Those on horseback, the court, mingled freely in the garden, but the knights spread out around the perimeter, keeping a guard over Titania and her assembled court. "Come on," Tobias said, directing Randy and me to stand beside the lady. "Do not speak unless spoken to, and for the lady's sake, please do not embarrass her." We were herded over to stand beside the lady, and as Titania took us all in, she seemed unsure of our numbers. "So few, my lady. You had thrice the number of advisors the last time I saw you." The pale lady bowed low, her own dress an airy-looking piece that reminded me of the lily pond, that she had stood above when we first met her. "My court is still rebuilding, my queen. I lay dormant for so long, and many of my retainers were scattered in my absence." Queen Titania nodded as if this were the most reasonable answer she'd ever heard. She offered the lady a hand, and my mistress was more than happy to lead her to her place of honor. "I smelled your table when we came through the gates, my dear, and it has made me ravenous. Let us proceed with the festivities." You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story? Or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, and Sue Casper for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Sarah ASMR42, and Bella Lee for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone so much. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. For just $5 a month, you get your stories 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. Also, if you'd like to join our Ghostly Reader contributor tier over on Patreon, you get a book anytime I write one on your doorstep, as long as you live in the continental U.S., of course. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.